Hey, Ryan. Welcome to the His and Her Money Show.
Hello, Ryan.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
We're super glad to have you here because you've been doing some incredible work lately. And I think this is a topic that there definitely needs to be much more conversation around, and there's just not enough conversation going on currently about it. So we're glad that you're willing to come on and share your insight with our audience today. But before we start going into all of your advice and discussing your new book, can you introduce yourself to everyone that's tuned in and let them know what you're all about?
Sure. So my name is Ryan Craig, and I am a writer and investor in the area of education, and specifically in higher education, and increasingly focused at the intersection of education and employment. I've been, like you, looking at the headlines around student debt, student loan debt, and college affordability issues. And that is where we're trying to make a difference here to look at what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, and what alternative pathways are available for people who are interested in getting better jobs.
So, I mean, you've come out with a brand new book called A New You. Talk to us about what prompted you to tackle this subject and create this new work.
Sure, sure. The book was really prompted by, not just what I call the crisis of college affordability, but also a crisis of employability. Just seeing after the Great Recession 10 years ago, seeing these numbers of college graduates who are coming out into what we call underemployment, which means that they're taking jobs they probably could have gotten without the degree in the first place, that investment of time and money and debt. So in the book, I interviewed dozens and dozens of recent college grads who are working in retail, working in restaurants. I don't literally have the classic example of the liberal arts graduate who goes on to become a Starbucks barista, but they're a lot like that. And the question is why? Why is this happening? There are really two sides of this coin, right? If everyone graduated into a $60,000 a year job, we'd be able to afford the nearly $40,000 in student loan debt that the average college graduate now carries. But they're not. They're not graduating with $60,000 a year jobs. And as a result, the student loan burdens are unsustainable. And it just raises the question of, what kinds of decisions are young people and older adults making around college and going to college, because increasingly not all colleges pay off.
Yeah. I think it's a multi-pronged problem. I think that on the one hand, colleges, the costs continue to go up, even despite so much innovation going on in so many other areas of society. And then two, I think that the education system and maybe some other corporate factors as well has kind of lulled us, the consumer, to sleep because when Ty and I were looking into going to college, student loans wasn't the norm, right? Now it's
Right.
like that's the first thing you look at. Like you don't even apply for scholarships and grants no more. It's like it's presented to you as the way to college is through student loans. And somehow that narrative has become so pervasive that even the parents assume that there are no other options out there. Is that an accurate picture of what you've seen in your research?
Yeah, absolutely right. It has become the norm. A generation ago, when you and I were going to school, it wasn't, and it cost a lot less. Right? College tuition has increased at double the rate of inflation for the last 30 years, and room and board and fees have increased at double that rate. A generation ago, most people could actually work their way through college. Right? Remember that, where you could work during the term and work during the summer, and essentially graduate with little or no debt. Today, that is literally impossible everywhere. I don't care if you're going to a four-year institution, you're in state or out of state or private college. Forget it. You can't do it. And so the average loan burden is about $40,000 a year, and students are being asked to shoulder that, and increasingly parents are taking out what are called Parent Plus loans as well. And you see these ridiculous numbers where people in their 60s and 70s are carrying the student loan debt of their children and having a tough time paying that into retirement. So it's the total number is 1.5 trillion. 1.5 trillion in student loan debt that we're carrying. And you're absolutely right. Your first point is that the costs keep going up. It's technology hasn't reduced the cost of education like it has of many other areas and products and services, for sure. Lots of schools are delivering programs online, but the vast majority of them charge exactly what they charge on ground, because in higher education, price is pretty synonymous with quality. People still tend to think that you kind of get what you pay for, but increasingly that's not true. So in my book, I talk about there are brands out there that are worth paying for, right? I mean, there are elite, famous, world-class brands that will give you access to opportunities and networks that you wouldn't have otherwise gotten access to, that it probably makes sense to stretch. But I use in the book, the Lumina Foundation, which is one of the leading foundations focused on higher education, has come up with a formula they call the Rule of 10, which is you should not be paying more for your child's college education than you can save over a 10-year period, which is defined as 10% of your discretionary income annually for 10 years, plus what the student can earn over the summers and working 10 hours a week. And what that means is that if you're earning $100,000, your household is $100,000 a year, then the total amount you should be paying out of pocket, whether out of pocket plus debt, for 4 years of college is about $60,000. That's what you can afford. And if you're making $50,000 a year, right? If your household income is about $50,000, then total amount you should be paying out of pocket plus debt for a 4-year program is about $16,000. And there's virtually no school in the country that means that, which basically means that according to this formula, if you're an average household in America, there's no 4-year college that's affordable for you. So that's a depressing set of circumstances.
Very much so. Yeah, and we're not even talking about what about those families such as ourselves. We have 3 children, right?
Close in age.
Yeah, very close in age. They're definitely stair-step, and they will probably be in college. They will be in college at the same time. So I remember growing up, I come from a family of 5, and I remember my mother having a conversation with me. My father, I don't remember him being involved in the conversation. He was probably at work, and I could tell you where we were. We were driving in the car. My mother looked at us, and she was like, "Hey, I had to figure out what I was going to do for school. You all are going to have to figure that out too." And I'm like, wait a minute, Mom, like you just bursted my balloon, right? I'm thinking I was going to go to HBCU out of state, and I was dreaming. And as soon as she put the responsibility on me, I then had to realize, like, okay, figure out what am I going to do, because now my parents are making me responsible for it. So talk about conversations that parents should be having with children, especially again. And not only was I one of 5 children, I also have an identical twin sister. So it was 2 of us going in at the same time. Now that I'm older, I get it. I understand. There would have been a huge burden on my parents. But they eventually did get student loans for my younger 2 siblings. So they like totally flipped the script on us. I'm like, thanks, Mom. But in the end, it worked out really for my good and in my favor. So talk about, conversations that parents should be having early on with their children. Should we be telling our children that we're going to cover the cost if we're putting money aside, like in a 529, or should we have real, raw, and honest conversations with our children to say, hey, you may have to put a little skin in the game?
Well, look, I think, there are lots of countries in the world where post-secondary education is basically free. And if some of these Democratic candidates have their way, we may get there as a country. I don't think that's likely. I think even if the Democrats can win the White House, unlikely that we decide to start spending, trillions of dollars on making college free. So we need to have these conversations. I would say a generation ago, it would have been about saving and working and maybe starting at a community college before transferring. But really, that's the purpose of this book, which is to say that the idea that somehow everyone needs to go to college to get a good job is just no longer accurate. In fact, with what I was saying before about underemployment, there are many, many, many millions of college graduates who are not able to get the good jobs that college graduates are supposed to get. And that's because the labor market for entry-level jobs has changed, and hiring has changed. And so increasingly employers are looking for technical and digital skills that colleges don't train on, right? The most commonly used software platform in American business today, SaaS platform, is Salesforce.com. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a CRM platform. I was speaking a few months ago to a group of about 200 college and university presidents and provosts, and I asked, how many of you actually provide any education or training on the Salesforce platform? And not one of them put up their hands. But increasingly, if you're looking, you can look at Fortune 500 CEOs. I don't know, I guess probably 100 of them got their start working in sales jobs, right? It's a good entry-level job for a new college graduate. Today, most of those jobs will say, we want 2 years of Salesforce experience. Where are those, people? So if you're looking for that job, going to a 4-year college may not be the right ticket to get that job. I'm not saying that less post-secondary education is desirable or even plausible. That's not the case. What we are arguing for is a pretty radical restaging of how you consume that post-secondary education. Historically, it's been get it all done, right? By the age of 22 or 23 or 24, you're educated, right? And you're ready for life, right? No more education, right? We don't do things that way anymore. We tend to buy things when we need them, right? So that's what we're talking about. So the subtitle of the new book is Faster and Cheaper Alternatives to College. We believe that in a decade, lots of young people will get their start out of high school working for a year or two and find their way to a job in a growing sector and a real job, not a retail job, but a career job with career pathways, and then work in that job for a couple of years with no debt, and then look around and ascertain sort of what secondary and tertiary educational pathway they'll need. And really what the book is about is this whole new set of faster and cheaper pathways to good first jobs that have emerged that are leading to these good first digital jobs. These are boot camps, these are apprenticeship models, staffing models. They all utilize what I call last mile training, which is sort of that last mile to the good first job. Everything we've done in education to date has always been what I call left to right, where you're sort of the level builds on the prior level. So what you learn in middle school is based on what you learned in elementary school, and what you learn in high school is based on what you learn in middle school. And what you learn in college continues from what you learned in high school. In this world where hiring has changed so much and first jobs have changed so much, we're suggesting a sort of right to left approach where you look at what skills are actually required for these entry-level jobs at good companies and work backwards from that. And what's the sort of minimum level of training and education required for that? And it's not 4 years, right? Working on a Salesforce platform, being a Salesforce administrator for a company, it does not actually, a lot of it is mechanical, right? It does not require sort of the level of cognitive skills that a liberal arts professor would like to think it does. So, we're focused on, we have, as we perceive it, sort of millennials have been sort of bleeding out economically. If you look at virtually every economic stat, they've fallen behind prior generations in terms of income, in terms of wealth, in terms of home ownership, in terms of new business creation. And the reason for that is clear, which is the combination of student loan debt and underemployment. So basically, the college formula is not working for everyone. We believe it's continuing to work well if you're attending a what I'll call selective school, right? And there are only about 200 of them in the country, meaning a school that accepts fewer than 50% of applicants. But if you're enrolling in college because it's a college and you're told that college is paid off and it's a non-selective school, you should not be spending an amount that exceeds Lumina's rule of 10, right? You should not be paying an unaffordable sum to attend a non-selective school. And if that's the boat that you're in, if that's the option set that you have available to you, you should look hard at an alternative, a faster and cheaper alternative pathway to a good first job, because that's going to almost certainly be a better economic outcome for you in the short term. In the longer term, in the intermediate and longer term, you're going to need more education. There's no question about that. And there's going to be a whole set of options that you'll have. But as you can imagine, when you're 24 and 25, having worked for a few years, you'll probably be able to make a more informed choice as to what certificate program, master's program, you name it, you're going to enroll in to get that level of additional education to bolster your critical thinking skills, problem-solving skills, communication skills that maybe you didn't get up front because that faster and cheaper pathway was specifically designed to lead to that first job.
Can you give us some examples of these pathways? Because I heard you mention, like you said, term like boot camp and internship. And I think we hear internship as something you do in college as you're preparing to leave college. Mm-hmm. But I think you might be talking about something different. Can you kind of break down what you mean by those?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably about 7 or 8 years ago, there was the launch of what we call these coding boot camps, which are these programs that go for 3 months, typically, maybe as long as 6 months, that are designed to sort of get you to a place where you're proficient in Java and are able to participate in software development or website building. And there are variants on it: UI UX boot camps, digital marketing boot camps have emerged. And so they began, and they were tuition based. So you'd pay $10,000, $15,000 for this, but the outcomes were generally pretty good. If you look at some of these programs, Galvanize is an example. You'll see that they advertise we have 70 to 80% placement rates into $70,000 a year starting salary jobs. So pretty good, and they don't require degrees, right? You don't need to have gone to college to attend one of these coding boot camps. So those were the early examples of these programs. Increasingly, we're seeing programs emerge that reduce the risk to students. So programs that don't charge tuition, but rather enter into a contract with the student that says you don't pay any tuition, but we're going to share some of your income after you graduate. So you're contractually agreeing to share 15% of your income for 3 years after you graduate from this program. And if you make below $40,000 a year, you don't pay anything. So they're making a bet on you. So there are a whole now host of these new programs that are income share based. They're not guaranteeing you a job, but the financial risk is much lower than, for example, a college enrollment decision. And now we're seeing the emergence of programs like Talent Path, for example, that are essentially frictionless for the student because they hire you from day one. So you're guaranteed a job, and they don't charge you, they pay you for it because they're training you in skills that they know that employers are going to demand, and they're going to make it on the back end from the employer. And then there are programs like Tectonic, for example. So Tectonic runs the first registered apprenticeship program in software development. So this is a program where you're hired from day one, you're paid, and you work as a software development apprentice. Right? The apprenticeships have been around for a long time, over a century, in the traditional, industrial and building trades. And now we're seeing the expansion of these apprenticeship programs into areas like software development. Aon in Chicago, the big insurance company, runs an apprenticeship program there for entry-level positions at Aon. We're seeing increasingly large companies launch apprenticeship programs as well. So, that is probably going to be a better return on investment for students than making a decision to enroll in a non-selective college and paying an unaffordable sum. But I would say that in the back of the book, there's a directory of about 250 of these programs, and some entrepreneur took the directory and put it up online. So you can see it at it's alternativestocollege.com, and you can see these programs, and they're organized by type of program, by geography, and you can, there's a lot of them now, and there are more coming online every week. Again, driven by these dual crises of college affordability and employability.
We'll be sure to have that link in the show notes of this episode. There was a recent story where billionaire Robert Smith, he was given an honorary doctorate at Morehouse College, and he chose to set up a grant that is going to pay off the debts of that graduating class from Morehouse. And, it was first response was, man, that is so incredible, such an awesome thing. You can only imagine what was going through their minds as they were standing there at their graduation, and he makes this surprise announcement.
And their parents,
and like a big relief. But then, the numbers started to come out, and I started to do some math. I was like, wait a minute. So the numbers started coming out that it was going to be somewhere around $40 million that he would be paying to get rid of these student loans. And there was 400 students in the graduating class. So I do the math. I'm like, wait a minute. So the average person in that class at that school was looking at $100,000 of student loan debt. I'm like, did anybody pull out their calculator on this? I mean, that's a hard pill to swallow. I don't care what degree you left out of there with, to start your new life with 6 figures of debt. Whew, that's why this conversation, I think, is super needed, and these alternatives are great.
Well, you shouldn't have to win the lottery or to be, get lucky like that to, get a fresh start, right? To be able to start your career without the burdens of knowing that you're going to have to pay $400 or $500 every month. Where's that going to come from, right? I mean, what we find is that when students graduate with that level of debt, they're going to take the first job that they can find that will allow them to make that loan payment. That's one reason why we have underemployment, right? You're not taking necessarily the best job. You're under financial pressure from the get-go. I mean, we see surveys that show that millennials have basically lost faith in capitalism, right? More believe in socialism than in capitalism. And this is a big problem, right? I mean, we have saddled this generation. We've told them that college is the only pathway to good jobs, and that you need to pay whatever it takes. And, it's not debt, it's an investment you're making in your future. That sort of language is what we've been telling our children. And the answer is you need to think about it. It may be a smart investment, but it may not be, right? It depends on the college. It depends on how much. It also depends on what you major in. There are huge variances within colleges, selective and non-selective, across majors. Obviously, not. You won't be surprised to learn that engineering and computer science are going to have better financial outcomes than the liberal arts and the fine arts, for example, the humanities. And that's just a function of this is what employers are looking for entry level jobs. Not that the skills and competencies that these other programs are preparing students on aren't useful or valuable. It's a question of order, right? Entry level jobs where you're using some sort of software or SaaS platform to help manage a business function require a certain level of digital skills, a certain level of cognitive skills, and a certain level of soft skills. And if you talk to your typical university or college professor, they're not particularly focused or incentivized by that mix, right? That's not why they're there. If you were to ask a bunch of college and university faculty, how many of you are excited or motivated to get up every day and help prepare students on exactly the set of skills that employers are looking for entry-level jobs? That's not why they're there. Most colleges continue to believe that they're preparing their students for their fifth jobs, not their first jobs, right? They prepare you on the eternal skills, the skills which will last you a lifetime. Well, unfortunately, that's not how employers are thinking. Employers are looking for bodies to do jobs, and they'll pay them $40,000, $50,000 a year to use some sort of software platform to help manage a business function. And our colleges and universities are neither training on the software platforms nor on the business functions. So, this book is really about a new set of educational options that are oriented around what employers are seeking, as opposed to what colleges and universities want to teach.
Imagine a life where your money isn't strangled by mortgage payments. Imagine what you could do when you don't have to send them money that you work so hard for. Come get simple, powerful, and real solutions to eliminating monthly mortgage payments forever. America's #1 money couple presents Crush My Mortgage. In this exclusive course, you will be equipped with strategies to help you move faster toward the promised land of owning your house free and clear. Learn strategies to help you in the areas of payment acceleration, extra income generation, and wealth creation, all to help you crush your mortgage. Visit crushmymortgage.com and get started today. Join us on the path to power, freedom, and legacy. That's crushmymortgage.com.
I have two segments of people in my mind for this next question, and they may even be the same person. So you may have somebody like us who has kids that we're raising and we're pushing hard on education. And you also might have that just a regular adult worker who is thinking that they need to go back to school to advance their career. What you're proposing makes total sense, but it will force us to undo decades of mental training that we've been given consciously and subconsciously about taking the traditional path to post-secondary education as being the only way. How do we come out of that mindset to embrace these new alternatives that can get us to our goals faster and cheaper?
Well, I think a financial analysis. Be a financial literacy, recognizing what your payments are going to be, right? Assuming even if you finish the degree program in 4 years, which most people don't do. So if you're going to a public college or university, it's going to be 5 years, 6 years, typically. And it's not just the tuition; it's the cost of living, right? That you're borrowing probably as well. What does that work out to? What are the loan payments that you can expect to make? And what is that going to do relative to what your other options are? So again, in a world where we've sort of blindly assumed that college pays off and college is an investment, we don't think about looking at alternatives, looking to see what apprenticeships are available in technology and other growth sectors of the economy. Is it possible to get a job, working in healthcare, right out of high school? And the other part is that you talked about older workers. I talk in my book about Janesville, Wisconsin, which is a town in Wisconsin that was hit hard about a decade ago when the General Motors plant closed. And there were about 3,000 auto workers who were put out of work. And they were told that their only pathway back to a good job lay through the community college. And they had to go back into class, sit in the classroom for up to 2 years. And, you won't be surprised that most of those auto workers didn't complete, right? This is not an environment where they were particularly successful 20, 30 years ago, right, when they were in school, and they didn't complete the program. So, we are excited about these new alternative pathways where it's not a classroom, it's more like a work environment, right? You're going to, and some of them, it is a work environment because you're being hired from day one. So, I'd encourage your listeners to look at this free online directory that's available. Take a look and see if there are alternatives, and just be, financially conscious of the decisions you're making. And I think that, sort of look at the enrollment trends over the last few years, we're seeing more and more people being quite skeptical, and lots of schools that charge high tuition that may not be achieving the employment outcomes that students are looking for are falling short, in some cases far short of their enrollment goals. So they know they need to change as well. They know that they need to become more focused on employment and employability. So it's going to be a bit of a wrenching change for this $500 billion industry that we call higher education, and 4,000 colleges and universities. And some of them won't make it. I mean, you may have seen some of the news over the last few months. A bunch of smaller schools are closing up. And that may happen, unfortunately, and there are victims to that, not just the people working there and students who are going there and alumni who went there and find they no longer have an alma mater that continues to exist, but also the towns and cities that are sort of economically driven by these schools. So, but we will see a significant change. Some people have said they think half of colleges and universities in the country will close in a decade. I don't think that. I think that most of these schools are pretty resilient, and they'll figure out a way to muddle through partnerships or through focusing their energies in certain areas. But they will be smaller, and they will be different than the way they are today. But the other side of it is that these schools then have an opportunity, because there are going to be millions of young people and older workers who are starting their careers through these faster and cheaper alternative pathways, who are going to need those secondary and tertiary pathways, right, to build up those critical thinking skills, problem-solving skills, executive skills that they would have gotten in an earlier age in a traditional 4-year bachelor's degree program. And so there will be an opportunity to develop and launch these new programs those are going to be critical, because without that, then we will be falling behind in the sort of global knowledge economy.
Yeah, our children, our oldest is 9, our youngest is 5. And as a parent, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to that website that you mentioned. I'm going to look at what's out there, because I think that we need to be proactive. We need to foster some of the passions that we see in our children now. So there are other alternatives, you know what I mean? And I think that we do need to have this conversation with our children. It's different from when we went to school, where everybody was made to feel like if you weren't going to college, it was a bad thing right out of school, right? And you weren't going to make it or be successful. So I think as parents, we need to be very, very responsible, and we need to do our work now and do our research. So to have resources such as your book and the website that you mentioned is hands down, I mean, it's gold.
Yeah, I think that's where my mind was going as well. Like, do you have any advice on how to broach this topic with our kids, whether they're high school or middle school or anything like that? Because, we can take this conversation and say, hey, son, you can go to a coding boot camp and come out on the other side with a very good paying job. And he'll look back and say, well, what the heck is coding? Or what the heck is Salesforce? Or what the heck is Java?
I think they know.
So I'm just saying that some might need some exposure. Like, he might know what it is, but may not know that, I might like that. Mm-hmm. Is there ways to expose our kids to these different niches of employment to see if it's even something that they would have an interest in?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great question. Well, one thing is that high schools are going to need to do a lot more in terms of incorporating career discovery into their curricula. Right now, it's about college discovery, not career discovery. Another point is that if you look at the percentage of teenagers, I know you don't have teenagers yet, but you will in a few years, teenagers who are working, who actually engage in paid work, it's about half of what it was a generation ago. So we're and this is a function of the sort of college, mania. Right. The focus is, let's burnish your college application. Let's make it look as good as it can through volunteering and internships and travel study and these, programs that people put on their college applications. And so, there's just not that much exposure to what it's actually like to work. It's funny. I was speaking last year in Boston and talking about this, and a woman complained. She said, I can't find workers for my entry level positions that have the necessary soft skills. Right. And I said, well, what is your organization? She says, I run travel study programs for high school and college students. I said, so look in the mirror, because instead of working and getting those soft skills, these young people are going in on your programs. And that's why they don't have the soft skills. So I think exposing them to paid work at as early as possible age, I think that is very productive. And then I think I'm asked this all the time by journalists. What do you think about college for your kids? My answer is, look, if you get into a selective school and it's affordable, no one will be a bigger cheerleader than I will. That's absolutely a great investment to make. But if that's not your option set, then all I care is that you're surrounded by people you're going to learn from. And I don't care what environment that is. That could be a work environment. That could be a learning environment. It could be a travel environment. Lots of parents are looking increasingly at what are called gap years, where students are going off and doing travel or volunteering or even work abroad, and coming back, and they're going to be more informed about what it is they want to do after that year. Working for a year or two after high school is almost never a bad idea when it comes to this. The question is, what do you want to do? How can you get to it, and so forth? And certainly, the directory in the book is a good place to start. But just fundamentally, the expectation shouldn't be that you have to go to college and that you have to go to college immediately. College is probably a good idea. You're going to need to get that level of education at some point. It doesn't need to be immediately, and it doesn't need to be in that form necessarily. There are all sorts of new and innovative ways to develop those capabilities and skills, and they don't all go by the name of college.
Awesome. So tell everybody more about the new book and how they can get a copy.
So the book is called A New You, Faster and Cheaper Alternatives to College. It's available on Amazon. And the website that I mentioned, again, it's just a free website of essentially it's the directory of these faster and cheaper alternative programs, about 250 of them, these boot camps, apprenticeships, income share programs, short courses, and so forth. It's available at www.alternativestocollege.com.
Awesome. And what about if people want to stay in touch with you? Where are you at on the internet?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Ryan Craig AP. So Ryan Craig AP, and look forward to conversing with anyone who wants to chat about alternatives to college.
Ryan, this has been super educational. We really appreciate you taking time to break down this topic with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.